Hey, Nick, we're back with our dear friend Andrew.
What's up, Nick?
Yes, sir. What's up? How are you guys doing?
Doing really well.
We're going to talk about Lockbit Ransomware today. And I know you've spent the last week looking at the Royal Mail situation. You wrote us a paper, Nick, about kind of what all the threat intelligence around Lockbit is. There was arrest that was out there. And so we're going to kind of break down kind of our perspective on what we're seeing from this threat actor and, you know, what we need to be really thinking about as we move forward here into the future. So, Nick, what's your first question for us?
Well, while I've been, reading all these articles about Royal Mail, kind of the arrest by the DOJ, kind of the stuff like that, what is a threat actor for someone like me who's never seen what one is in person, I guess?
It's a great question, and it's one I think that intelligence professionals struggle with sometimes to really define a threat actor. But essentially, a threat actor can be any individual or group or criminal entity, or even in fact a state entity, a foreign nation that poses a threat to the United States, to its businesses, or to its people. It's particularly challenging to define in the cyber realm because cyber kind of combines all of those sorts of threat actors and in ways that we don't always clearly see. In this case with Lockbit, you have a very interesting combination of individuals who are clearly running a highly organized, structured, professional criminal organization, and they appear to be doing so with at least the implicit permission or protection of the Russian state. So you have this crossover between individual criminals and then highly organized into a criminal enterprise, as we say here in the United States, but also functioning with the expertise and the protection and likely the resources of a really formidable foreign nation threat actor. That's, of course, the government of Russia, which we've always considered to be a hostile threat actor here in the United States for many decades.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I see information security practitioners get confused about is threat actor versus threat. And they convolute the definitions between what Andrew was talking about relative to the people, the individuals or organizations, and the technologies, and they mesh them together. And you'll sometimes hear that you've got the ransomware threat. Well, that is not necessarily a specific threat actor. Ransomware is a type of tool that's used as an instrument of crime to buy these threat actors in order to be able to commit their wrongdoings.
That's exactly right. And so it's almost helpful to think about it in a more basic criminal context, right? If you think about street level organized crime groups, one of the things they do is they go to businesses and extort them for protection money. So in that case, the organized crime group is the threat actor, but the threat itself is extortion, right? If you don't pay this group or that group a certain amount every week or month, they're going to burn your business down. In the cyber context, you may have an individual who's been arrested for using the Lockbit ransomware. That individual is the threat actor. But the ransomware tactic, the technique of utilizing ransomware to steal from businesses, that's the actual threat itself.
I hate to do this to you, Andrew, but you did write the book on the threat, right? And it is one of my favorite books. It's a family favorite. And you did just mention extortion. And so I know that one of your first Russian organized crime cases in New York was around extortion.
It certainly was.
Can you give just a little brief about that particular case and how that's not too dissimilar from what we're dealing with here with these actors?
Sure, yeah. So I think the thing to keep in mind with all these actors and the things that they do, it's all about the money. It's not about anything else. They are by nature predatory. They are opportunists. They see an opportunity to make some money and they do it. In this case, it was an individual who used to own a furniture store, and he was part of a whole group of Russian furniture store owners in Brooklyn. And he left the country for a few years, came back and decided he wanted to be a gangster. So he put together a small crew around himself. And who better to victimize than his old business partners and friends, who he knew who they were and where they lived and how much money they had. So he started approaching each one of those store owners and saying, hey, you need to pay us $100 a week protection, or else, you never know, something bad might happen to your store. It might burn down and all your furniture goes up in smoke. And so gradually he convinced everyone to begin paying that amount. He set the amount small because he knew that they were more likely to pay it. And it would add up week over week, and that's of course what it did. So we were lucky to have been there in the beginning, and we had a great informant who worked with us. We made tapes and captured the whole extortion on tape, and ultimately we were able to bring the crew down. But that's very similar to what we're seeing with some of these cyber actors, right? You have utilizing a software, a ransomware product like Lockbit. They go out, they find victims who they think will be likely to pay. They find their way into the systems, deploy the ransomware software to freeze up computers, lock up data, basically hold the company hostage, and then extort it for money.
And it's part of the Russian culture, quite frankly. There's a term for it in Russia called, I believe it's krisha.
That's right.
And citizens are expected to pay krisha to kind of the local government, the local gang that kind of controls the local space, right?
Yeah, sure. So krisha in Russian literally means the roof. And it's like the roof is the thing that protects you from the weather, the rain, the snow, whatever that might be. And so you must buy a roof. And in communist times, particularly when the government really wasn't capable of protecting the people or delivering services the way we think of governments doing, you would have to pay protection to a local gangster or crew or mob, and for their protection. Of course, they didn't protect you, but it was that's how the rackets worked. Yeah. Russian organized criminal activity has always been a big part of Russian life. It's a part of American life as well, to be perfectly fair, but it has been really inextricably locked in with the Russian government for many decades. And so now we're seeing the real forefront of that activity in the cyber realm.
Yeah, and sometimes the local police officers even get involved in accepting and managing the krisha, right?
That's right. There's a real kind of gray area between the criminal actors and government actors. And So navigating that can be very tough. It's all done for the purpose of maximizing that revenue, right? Because as we said, it's always all about the money. And we see that now in the cyber realm with some of these more notorious, better organized, more profitable cyber criminal organizations. There are all kinds of indicators that they are operating likely from within the territory of Russia, but even if not physically located in Russia, they are doing so with the knowledge of and the protection of the Russian state. So that's how you get that really toxic overlap of criminal actors and nation state actors. Interesting.
So what I'm kind of hearing is the threat is ransomware, but if you don't have an actor that kind of initiates the attack, then if you don't have the two together, it doesn't really affect you.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's sometimes helpful to think about it from our old perspective as investigators. We're always thinking of the actors because that's who you catch. That's who you try to prosecute and throw in jail to stop the threat. That's really all you can go after. But for businesses and for the folks that we work with now at 10-8, really what they need to be thinking about is what you said, Nick, the threat itself. How do you protect yourself from all sorts of ransomware activity that could come from any number of different threat actors?
So can you help me break down some of the aspects of the November arrest with Mikhailov Vasilyev? What do you think we were dealing with here as before he got arrested? Is he the leader of the Lockbit, or do you think he's kind of just a person who bought it as a service?
Well, from what we've learned from the arrest and from the affidavit that the FBI made to get the criminal complaint against Vasilev, I think we're dealing with an organizer of the Lockbit ransomware. He used the moniker Lockbit Sup, which I believe to be he was the kind of the support for customers or affiliates that are involved in the use of this Lockbit ransomware. And as the kind of back-end support, he was really pulling the levers relative to how the money is supposed to be transferred, how the software is supposed to be developed. So he was a very significant organizer from what we can learn from the criminal complaint. That being said, he's part of a much larger group. And in spite of his arrest just in November, we see criminal activity on the underground with that same moniker, that same username, helping other affiliates in this Lockbit ransomware group continuing to operate. So from that perspective, I think we're dealing with a very important figure that was very organizing in the management of the Lockbit ransomware. However, I think he was just a bit player that was easily replaced, and the organization continues forward.
Yeah, I think that sounds exactly right. There's a couple of key things to remember whenever you're looking at one of these big international cyber arrests. The first is access. It's hard to investigate these guys who are operating almost entirely overseas, and it's almost impossible to arrest them because if they, let's say they remain in Russia or some other country that we don't have a functioning extradition treaty with, you can indict them, you can try to publicize the fact that you've made a criminal allegation against them. That's something we refer to as name and shame, but it's hard to actually get them back here to face a prosecution. So because Mr. Vasilev was in Canada, he was actually a rare exception to this. If you could put together an indictment, file charges, and work with the Canadians, you might actually be able to extradite him to put him on trial, which is what the Justice Department is doing now. They're trying to extradite him from Canada. That'll take a long time, but he'll probably end up back here. So access somewhat determines which targets you pick off, right? Because you try to take those ones that you can actually get. The second thing is what you said, Greg, which is Lockbit is out there, right? You're never going to be able to eliminate this threat by taking one person down, no matter how significant they are. But the advantage to taking a guy like Vasilev, who appears to have been in a key position in this organization, is if you get him in your hands, which we're in the process of doing that now, and he decides to cooperate, he's someone with the technical knowledge of both the institution and the software that could actually help the government counter the malevolent impact of the ransomware, no matter who deploys it, right? So if he's a guy who decides to work with the government and share what he knows, we might learn something from that we could use to actually make this Lockbit ransomware less dangerous for everyone.
That makes sense, because kind of what I'm hearing is like, since he was Lockbit Sup, but since we took him down, kind of one more just kind of replaces him and takes his place. So just kind of like there's a chain of demand that they kind of need.
It's an organized crime group. There's no easier way to say it than that. That they are all, each of the particular members of the organized crime group are dispensable, and they've built in resilience in order to be able to just be continuing to be up and running on to the next.
And this is still a very, very viable and lucrative scheme, right? Like we said, the software is still out there. So they're going to continue to use it, develop it, protect it, deploy it. It's up to us to really start picking people off that can maybe have an impact on our ability to defend against it in the long term.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
So
I think the prime example is the Royal Mail attack. Is clearly, this gentleman was arrested in November,
yeah.
and Royal Mail was
Still operated.
victimized, and there's been other victims as well since his arrest.
In fraud investigations, law enforcement often talks about, like you did, following the money. Can you give us an idea of what the work ahead for law enforcement officers trace the crypto coin transactions?
Sure. So crypto kind of threw a real curveball at law enforcement and fraud investigators around the world when it became the kind of currency of choice for criminal organizations. But to their credit, they've gotten much better at tracing some of those assets, actually accessing and recovering assets as a result of cybercrime. That work continues. It's still pretty dependent upon having an insider, an informant, a cooperating witness, or a cooperating defendant who's able to reveal some of the structure and the process through which these criminals acquire and move and store their Bitcoin. So it's still a pretty effective way to run your criminal enterprise and to collect criminal proceeds, but it's no longer as inviolable as it was originally. So bottom line is investigators have a lot of work to do, but there is some hope of having a pot of gold at the end of that journey.
Yeah, and I think one aspect that you started off with in our conversation was it's all about the money. And so one of the things that we find in this affiliate structure from a ransomware management perspective is it's all about the money. The people that are signing up to be part of this Lockbit Ransomware group are in it for the money. They get the ransom paid to them. The operators of Lockbit Ransomware get a percentage. So if you can follow the money, you have an effective trail to be able to get back to the subjects that are responsible for this activity.
Yeah, and if you can recover those funds, you've disincentivized the activity, right? If there's not as much money in it, people are going to move on to the next scam. So, I mean, that's a kind of very optimistic view of how we're doing and where we're going, but it's true, right? So if you look like historically traditional money laundering, with the development of U.S. anti-money laundering laws, we made it harder for criminals to move criminal proceeds through U.S. financial institutions. Kind of pushed criminals to develop and use things like crypto. And so that's a good news story. We've kind of stamped out some of the money laundering activity that takes place in our traditional banks and financial institutions. But it's like a balloon filled with water. As you squeeze it in one place, it pops up someplace else, and that's why we're dealing with it now on the crypto side.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really took from the criminal complaint that was useful was the FBI agent noted that this Lockbit ransomware is responsible for over $100 million in ransom demands across more than 1,000 victims. That is significant.
That's huge,
right?
Yeah.
This is no small operation, and and it really gets to one of the things that Andrew and I are passionate about is we have to get into the boardroom of organizations so that they understand they need to take action in order to be able to protect themselves against this very resilient threat.
That's right. It's diffuse. It's not one organization that runs these scams from start to finish. It's a complicated network of hackers and developers and those who kind of run and maintain the software and those who deploy it to the victims. So it's a very tough thing to stamp out. It's not going away overnight. And that's why the pressure is on for corporate management to understand this threat. That's the first step. Like you said, Nick, like what is a threat actor? And what's the difference between that and the threat itself? What do I need to be worried about? And then take the measures that we all know are pretty darn effective in reducing your risk of being victimized by this sort of activity. It's all business.
Going off those answers you just gave me about the, corporate protection, how they're protecting themselves. In my Dad and I's article, we talked about how Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, and I know you used to work really closely with Lisa when she worked in the White House, and she released a statement about this arrest, about how the arrest in Canada. Can you share more about the statement, how kind of the government is trying to protect corporate organizations as well?
Sure. Yeah, I know Lisa for many years. She was an executive in the FBI for a while, worked on Director Mueller's staff, and then, of course, back at the Justice Department and ultimately in the Obama White House. Lisa is a consummate professional and I think represents the investigative and prosecutorial side of DOJ very well. And I think what she said in that statement is emblematic not just of her personally, but of the department's position on these matters, which is they are not going to let it go. They know that these complicated, resource-intensive, long-term cyber investigations are exactly where DOJ and FBI need to be. There's no one else really as well suited to conduct these investigations. And they, despite how hard they are, despite the fact that it's hard to actually get foreign cyber actors back into the United States for prosecution, they also know that the even limited possibility of that is a strong disincentive to foreign criminal actors to victimize folks in the United States. So they're going to continue doing it for whatever value it has in slowing down this sort of cyber criminal activity that we're seeing on such a widespread scale. Now, you might say it's a drop of water in the ocean. It is a little bit, but that's what we do. It's not the only thing we should be doing to protect ourselves by any stretch. But it should be the tip of that spear going after those folks that are the most significant actors on the cybercrime side.
That makes sense. And adding on to that, I really liked the article that the quote that the DOJ talked about, and it says, "Let this be yet another warning to ransomware actors. Working with partners around the world, the Department of Justice will continue to disrupt cyber threats and hold penetrators to account. With our partners, we will use every available tool to disrupt, deter, and punish cyber criminals." And I thought that was kind of very enlightening for a lot of organizations and companies, kind of after what we just saw Royal Mail go through.
No doubt. And it's not hollow words. It's not just chest pounding. I mean, we've seen, Greg, a number of kind of high-level cyber criminals who have been picked off in transit when they've left Russia with their families to go on vacation, and
I've never been involved in any
beautiful,
of those
beautiful sunny places. Sometimes all you have to do is step foot into a place where we enjoy a good relationship and an extradition treaty, and it's game on. And so the most sophisticated actors, they know that, and if nothing else, getting an indictment against someone like that, lodging it with Interpol, getting a red notice, it pins those people down physically to Russia and other places where they are beyond the reach of U.S. extradition. And that in itself is a victory of sorts.
One of the things that I'm concerned about, and I think we share the same concern, is this group targeting Royal Mail at this time relative to let's talk about Lockbit from a technical perspective here a little bit. They have formed their malware so that it will not operate in the former Russian states, the Commonwealth of Independent States. Rather, it will only operate in the United States, Europe, Ukraine. I think that there are some, potentially political divides that are apparent in the software that they've deployed. Let's speculate a little bit. You target Royal Mail. You've got the UK government who's really pushing to, get more involved. You got
It's
Boris
hard.
Johnson over in Kiev just the other day, right?
That's right. It's hard to ignore the geopolitical significance of the weaponization of Lockbit against the Royal Mail. As you said, Greg, a number of indicators that even without this attack would indicate to us to fairly high degree of confidence that this is a Russian actor who is doing what they're doing with at least the tacit approval of the Russian state. It's software that doesn't work in Russian-speaking countries. It's software that is not deployed in Russia. And the only semi-Russian speaking country, I know they speak Ukrainian in Ukraine, but the only former Russian state in which Lockbit has been deployed and used aggressively is in Ukraine. Now, of course, we see the targeting of the UK. Is it a coincidence that targeting is happening at the same time the United Kingdom has decided to start supplying tanks and other pretty significant military hardware to the battlefield in Ukraine to be used against the Russians? Well, I don't have any proof of that, but it is an extraordinary set of circumstances there. So it's not hard to theorize that now you have this criminal actor, very adept, very profitable, targeting only Western states and Western countries, now seemingly being used as a part of the Russian geopolitical response to the hostilities that they have perpetrated in Ukraine. So it really, I think, makes a sound case for the argument that this is a partially state actor activity.
Yeah, and I often bring this back up, and former CIA director James Woolsey always used to tell me there's a little difference between a Russian businessman, a Russian politician, and a Russian organized crime figure. They're one and the same. And, you can't...
At least with Lockbit, I think that's what we've got. So, once again, the wisdom of Mr. Woolsey haunts us to this day. So, yeah,
indeed.
For sure.
Well, let's get down to the very bottom line. What can corporate leadership do, or what could corporate leadership teams do, and what could security practitioners do to be able to at least kind of protect their organization or government agency from getting attacked by a ransomware or Lockbit attack?
Well, Nick, I think the first step is always understanding. You cannot protect yourself if you don't understand the threat. And nowhere is that more important than in the corporate context. Your corporate leadership, your CEO, your board, the folks overseeing your security practice need to understand the details of how these threats work and why they're significant, why they need to dedicate resources, corporate resources, to protect against these threats. That is something that 10.8 can help our corporate partners with. That's where our expertise and communication ability comes in. We can help you to communicate to your board and to your corporate leadership.
Exactly, Andrew. This organization, this Lockbit threat actor, is extremely resilient. They are extremely agile. They modify their attacks based on the latest vulnerabilities that are hitting the wire. They also clearly are durable against arrest and quickly replace those that have been taken out by law enforcement. This organization is not going away. This ransomware threat is continuing to evolve. We are on the front lines helping to understand the issue with our partners, also to help our clients articulate the types of investments that need to be made in order to protect organizations. For example, this ransomware actor is about researching the most critical vulnerabilities as soon as they're released.
That's right.
And they weaponize those vulnerabilities to exploit their victims. It's their fastest path to money. And so you need to have a very active vulnerability management activity within your organization to know the vulnerabilities as soon as they're developed and remediate those as quickly as possible. You also need to understand the business impacts that these types of attacks can have on your organization. When you look at a situation like Royal Mail, where a lot of Royal Mail's customers are outside of the United Kingdom, and if they can't do business by printing the labels that are necessary in order to be able to dispatch mail to foreign countries, that's shut down. And that costs them money, it costs it hurts their reputation. And every business needs to look at what's the services that they're providing, and how do we, from a risk management perspective, make sure that those are available and resilient to these kinds of attacks.
That's absolutely right. So it's understanding the threat, understanding your business, what you need to protect, and quite frankly, changing your corporate culture if that's a necessary part of the equation. Basic things like access management and training your employees adequately to avoid things like phishing email attempts and credential theft, and kind of the normal panoply of vectors that these actors use to get inside.
Andrew, thank you for taking the time to walk through this very significant threat that organizations are facing. Your experience from a Russian organized crime perspective, from being in the top of law enforcement leadership, you have such a perspective on all of these issues. So thank you for sharing that. And obviously, we can help organizations significantly frame these problems for themselves.
Absolutely.
Nick, why don't you take us home?
Yeah, well, definitely. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you learned something from kind of this little discussion we had. And if you have any questions, contact 108 Cyber, and we're always here to help. But thank you for listening, and please like and comment. Thank you.